The night her face was taken. Every curse begins with love turned to envy. The wind howled like a widow that night. It swept through the black pines of the northern woods, bending them low until they whispered secrets to the moon. The manor on the hill stood half ruined, its windows blind, its hearth long dead. Inside, a girl of 17 knelt before a mirror that no longer recognized her. Elara of House Varin. Her beauty had once been the song of the realm. Artists painted her in secret. Princes crossed borders to glimpse her smile. But all that light drew shadow, and the shadow wore her stepmother's face. Lady Morwen was a woman carved of moonlight and venom, once beautiful, now desperate to hold the fading echoes of youth. She loved nothing she could not own, and envied everything she could not destroy. That night she watched Elara from the doorway, her hands clasped over a goblet of black wine. The candlelight wove gold through her dark hair, but her eyes were pits of green fire. "You should not look at yourself so much, child," Morwen said softly. "The mirror grows tired of you." Elara turned. "You summoned me." Morwen smiled. "I only wished to give you a gift." The goblet shimmered with strange light. Elara hesitated, but her stepmother's voice had the weight of law. She drank, and in that moment the world split. Her reflection began to ripple, the contours of her face warping, melting, reforming into something the gods themselves might fear. Morwen's voice was a whisper, sweet as silk. "Your beauty will not fade, my dear. It will burn anyone who dares to love you." Elara fell to her knees, her scream swallowed by the night. Outside, the moon turned blood red. Chapter 1. The Girl Behind the Veil. The years that followed were neither kind nor cruel, only long. Elara had fled the manor before dawn, leaving behind her father's lands, her name, her past. The forest became her refuge, its silence her companion. She learned to move like shadow, to survive without warmth, to bind her face beneath a veil of grey silk that never left her skin. They called her the Veiled One now, a spirit or a witch depending on who whispered the tale. None knew the truth, that beneath her veil lived the remnants of a curse, half light, half ruin. Tonight she was hunting by moonlight. Mist wound through the trees, cool against her gloved hands. The forest was heavy with scent, pine sap, wet moss, and the faint copper tang of coming rain. Her bowstring hummed under her fingers. A stag crossed the clearing, silver-tined and solemn. She drew breath, drew arrow, and the sound of hooves shattered the night. Elara froze. She had not heard horses here in years. Through the trees, torches flickered. Men rode in black and crimson armor, soldiers of the northern realm. Their banners bore the mark of the black wolf. Her pulse stuttered. That sigil was whispered in fear even among bandits. The Alpha-King was near. She had heard the stories. Kyle Dravin, ruler of the 7 wolf clans, breaker of empires. They said he was born beneath an eclipse, that his eyes burned silver when angered, that no spell could touch him. But they said many things about kings. Elara stepped back into the shadows. The men dismounted. One knelt to examine the soil, fingers tracing the faint outline of tracks. Her tracks. "Someone's been here," the soldier murmured. And then another voice, deeper, calm, edged with command. "Leave it." She looked up. He was taller than she expected, his cloak heavy with rain, his presence sharp as the cold. The torchlight gilded the scar that ran along his jaw, a pale reminder of battles survived. But his eyes, grey like tempered steel, were not cruel. They were searching. He turned his head, and for one unbearable heartbeat she thought he saw her. Then his gaze drifted on. He mounted again, and his voice broke the hush. "The wolves are restless tonight. Ride north." The hooves faded, the mist closing behind them. Yet the echo of his presence lingered, unsettling and magnetic. Ilara pressed her hand to her heart, startled by the way it refused to slow. The curse beneath her skin stirred. Danger, it whispered. Desire. They were never far apart. Chapter 2. The Alpha-King's Shadow. By dawn the rain had come, soft, relentless, soaking the forest in silver haze. Ilara's small cottage at the forest's edge was hidden beneath ivy and stone, nearly swallowed by time. She had built it herself, brick by brick, from the ruin of what she once was. Inside, she lit a candle. Its flame trembled with the wind's breath. She unwrapped her veil, her reflection caught in the warped glass of a basin. Half her face remained human, soft, pale, marked by the faintest scar along her cheekbone. The other half shimmered faintly, as though veins of gold and ash moved beneath her skin. Her left eye glowed with unnatural light. Once she would have wept. Now she only touched the scar and whispered to herself, "I am still here." A knock at the door startled her. No one knocked. Ever. "Ilara Varin," a voice said, firm, unfamiliar. "By command of His Majesty Kael Dravin, Alpha King of the North, you are summoned to the fortress at Dareth Keep." Her blood ran cold. How did he know her name? No one had spoken it in years. When she opened the door, a soldier stood there, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, eyes wary but not unkind. His cloak bore the wolf sigil. Behind him, the rain hissed against steel. "I think you have the wrong person," she said quietly. He hesitated. "We found your tracks last night. His Majesty requests your presence. He says you may know why the forests bleed silver." She said nothing. The curse stirred inside her again, alive and restless. At last she nodded once. "Give me a moment." She wrapped her veil again, her grey hood drawn low. The soldier didn't ask why she hid her face. He only looked away, as though instinct warned him not to pry. As she followed him through the rain, Ilara felt the weight of destiny at her back. The forest watched, the wolves howled, and somewhere beyond the mist, the Alpha King waited. Chapter 3. The King and the Veil. There are meetings that do not belong to chance. They belong to ruin and to fate. The road to Dareth Keep was carved through the ribs of the mountains, a narrow, winding path where the mist never fully lifted. The rain had ceased by noon, but the air remained heavy, tasting faintly of iron and pine. Ravens followed them for miles, dark wings beating against a bruised sky as though bearing witness to something the living were not meant to see. Ilara rode behind the soldier who had come for her. His name, she learned, was Captain Corin Vale. A man of few words, yet his silences were not empty. They held the weight of unsaid loyalty. His left hand bore a silver ring etched with runes she didn't recognize. When she asked its meaning, he only said, "The price of survival." That was answer enough. Hours passed before the walls of Dareth Keep rose from the fog, stone towers spearing the sky, banners of black and crimson snapping in the wind. The fortress stood on a cliff above a churning sea, its windows burning with pale fire. It looked less built than born, an extension of the mountain's heart. At the gate, a line of armored guards awaited. None spoke as she passed beneath the iron archway. She could feel their eyes on her, the way they lingered on her veil, the way curiosity slid into unease. Inside, the corridors were lit by torches that smelled of resin and salt. The air thrummed faintly with an old magic, the kind that did not announce itself, but watched, patient and waiting. Corin led her through a great hall of wolf banners and cold stone. The silence of the place was reverent, as though the walls themselves listened. He stopped before a pair of high doors carved with runic symbols and turned to her. "Wait here," he said. Do not remove your veil in the king's presence unless commanded. Do you understand? Elara nodded once. Then the doors opened. The Alpha-King stood at the far end of the chamber before a tall window overlooking the sea. The last light of dusk caught his figure, a man clothed in black and silver, the storm reflected in his eyes. He turned when she entered, and the world seemed to hold its breath. His presence was not loud, not theatrical. It was steady, like the gravity of something ancient, the kind of strength that did not need to prove itself. "Leave us," Kyle said, his voice low. The soldiers withdrew at once, leaving only the sigh of the wind and the soft crackle of the hearth between them. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply studied her, the way her cloak clung to her damp shoulders, the way she held her chin high even as the torchlight trembled across her veil. She could feel the weight of his gaze, unflinching and curious. "You live deep in my forests," he said finally. "You walk where even my wolves refuse to tread. And yet—" He stepped closer, his boots soundless on the stone. "The forest does not devour you." "Why is that?" Elara's voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. "Because I do not fear it. Fear keeps most alive," he murmured. "Fear also keeps them from seeing what's worth saving." That earned a flicker of something in his expression, approval perhaps, or amusement. It was hard to tell. He circled her once as though mapping her silence. "You wear a veil as though hiding from the gods themselves." "Perhaps I am, and if I asked what lies beneath it?" She met his eyes through the thin veil. "You would not like the answer. Try me." The words were calm, but his tone carried that subtle command of a king who had been obeyed all his life. And yet, she sensed something else beneath it, curiosity tinged with the faintest hint of longing. Elara said nothing. She only turned slightly away, her gloved hand brushing the edge of the window ledge. Outside, the sea was silver-black, reflecting the coming moon. The wind carried the faint scent of storm and salt. "I came when you summoned me," she said. "What is it you want of me, your majesty?" Kyle's gaze lingered on her hands. "The forest bleeds," he said quietly. "My scouts found trees turned to ash, rivers running silver. They say witchcraft lingers there. You live in those woods, you know them." Elara's breath caught. The curse. It was spreading. She steadied her voice. "If the forest suffers, it's because something old has been disturbed. Tell your men to stay out." He stepped closer again, his presence near enough for her to feel the faint heat of him. "My men obey me. And you," he paused, studying her veil, "you will tell me what threatens my land." "And if what threatens your land," she said softly, "is me." Something flickered in his eyes then, not anger, recognition, the kind that passed silently between two people who had both bled in their own ways. "I don't believe that," Kyle said. "You don't move like a destroyer. You move like someone who's already lost too much." For the first time in years, Elara nearly broke. The quiet understanding in his voice scraped at something fragile inside her. She turned away, her throat tight. "You should not look at me with such eyes, my lord. Nothing good comes of it." "I've been told that before," he said. "And still I look." Later, when she was led to her quarters, a small chamber overlooking the sea, she found a tray of food left untouched by servants and a folded cloak bearing the sigil of the Black Wolf. A gesture of trust, perhaps, or pity. She touched the fabric. It was warm, heavy, real. Through the window she saw the courtyard below. The Alpha-King stood alone in the rain, staring toward the mountains, his hands clasped behind his back. The wolves circled him, silent, obedient. He looked not like a ruler, but like a man fighting an unseen storm. And she felt the strange ache of it, the pull of something she dared not name. She whispered to herself, "I will not fall again." but the heart does not listen to its keeper. Chapter 4. The Sea and the Fire. Some meetings are not beginnings but remembering, souls recognizing the ache they were born with. Morning came grey and sleepless. A thin mist rolled from the sea, coiling around the stone balustrades of Dareth Keep like a restless spirit. The gulls' cries were distant, swallowed by the roar of the waves below. Elara stood by her window, still veiled, watching light struggle to rise through the fog. She hadn't slept. Her mind had replayed the king's voice, the sharp steadiness of it, the way he had looked at her as if seeing something sacred and cursed in equal measure. No one had looked at her like that in years. A knock broke the silence. "Enter," she said, though her heart tensed. It was Leora, a woman perhaps in her 30s, tall, willow-slender, with eyes the color of burnt honey and a healer's grace in her hands. Her presence filled the room with quiet calm, the kind that came from years of tending wounds that would not close. "You're awake," Leora said softly. "The king asked that you join him at the cliffs before breakfast." Elara hesitated. "Did he say why?" Leora smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "The king rarely explains himself. But he hasn't slept either, if that comforts you." It didn't. Still, Elara nodded. She drew her grey cloak tighter, adjusting the veil until not a thread of skin showed. Leora watched her with careful curiosity. Not unkind, but cautious, like someone who had seen too many forms of magic to dismiss any of them as myth. "Do they all look at you like that?" Elara asked. Leora tilted her head. "Like what?" "As if they're afraid of what they don't understand." A pause. Then Leora said quietly, "Fear isn't always hatred. Sometimes it's awe." Elara didn't reply. She followed her down the winding corridors, the scent of burning cedar filling the air. The keep was awake now, servants moving quietly, guards changing posts, the sound of wolves somewhere in the distance. Yet every step echoed, as though the stones remembered older footsteps, older griefs. When they reached the courtyard, Kyle was waiting. He stood by the gate, cloak thrown over one shoulder, the wind tugging at his dark hair. The sea stretched behind him, endless, grey and alive. He turned when he heard them approach, and for an instant something softened in his gaze. "Thank you, Leora," he said. "Leave us." Leora bowed slightly, her eyes flicking once to Elara before she withdrew, a flicker of warning, perhaps, or understanding. It was hard to tell. They walked without words for a time. The cliffs were slick with rain, the scent of salt thick in the air. Below, the sea crashed against the rocks, relentless and eternal. Kyle moved with a quiet strength, every step deliberate. Elara followed at a measured distance, her skirts brushing the heather. "Why bring me here?" she asked finally, her voice nearly lost to the wind. Kyle stopped near the edge, the horizon reflected in his eyes. "Because this is where truth sounds different," he said, "and I need yours." He turned to face her. The light hit his features then, hard lines softened by fatigue, by something more human than legend. "The curse that touches my forests, it began the night before we found you. My wolves felt it first. They howled until their throats bled." Elara looked away, her fingers tightening around the edge of her cloak. "Then perhaps your forest knows more than it should." "Perhaps," he said, "but when I saw you the wind changed. The silence that's haunted those woods broke. I don't believe in coincidence." Her heart stuttered. "And what do you believe in then?" Kyle's eyes found hers through the veil, fate, and the cruel mercy of it. A shiver went through her, not from fear but from the way he said mercy, like a man who had never known it. The wind rose, carrying her scent, wild herbs, smoke, something faintly floral beneath. He inhaled before he realized it, and his jaw tightened. His instincts warred between command and desire. "I don't wish to harm you," he said finally, almost to himself. "But you bring storms with you, Elara." "I didn't ask to," she whispered. "Storms find me." He stepped closer, his shadow mingling with hers on the wet ground. "You could have run when I summoned you. Yet you came. Why?" She hesitated. "Why did I?" Because his voice had sounded like something she could trust. Because for one moment she wanted to be seen again, not feared, not pitied, but seen. "I owed you nothing," she said. "But perhaps I owed the forest." He studied her, the muscle in his jaw shifting. Then, slowly, he lifted a gloved hand, hesitated, and brushed a raindrop from her shoulder. Even that small touch sent heat through the fabric between them. "Tell me what your stepmother did to you," he said. Her breath caught. "How do you know?" "Your name," he said softly. "Varin. It was once noble. Your father's lands were burned to ash when Lady Morwen accused your house of witchcraft. I fought in that war." His words hit like a blade through glass. I didn't know you then," Kyle said. "But I saw the ruins. I saw the curse smoke that rose for days. I remember thinking, no sin warrants that kind of silence." Silence. That word again. Her throat burned with everything she'd buried. "You fought under her banner." "I did," he said quietly. "And I regret it still." The wind swallowed the rest, the sea roaring below them. For a moment the distance between them shrank, not physically but in the strange way souls drift closer when truths are spoken aloud. Then Kyle reached up, his hand hovering near her veil. "Let me see what she took from you." She stepped back sharply. "Don't, Elara. You cannot unsee it," she said, her voice trembling. "And I will not let you look at me the way the others did, with pity, with horror, with that cursed wonder." He didn't move closer, but his voice deepened, steady. "Do I strike you as a man who pities easily?" "No," she whispered, "and that terrifies me." The wind howled between them. Somewhere a wolf called out, a low, mournful sound that echoed across the cliffs. Kyle lowered his hand. "Then I will wait," he said, "until you trust me enough to lift it yourself." No oath could have carried more weight. When she returned to her chamber, her pulse still echoed like thunder in her veins. She leaned against the door, her breath unsteady, and pressed her hand to her chest. For years she had believed her heart long buried beneath the ashes of Morwen's curse. Now it beat, too fast, too loud, too alive. From the window she could see Kyle on the battlements below, speaking to Leora. The healer's face was grave, her eyes flicking up toward Elara's window with quiet comprehension. Elara turned away. She didn't want anyone, least of all herself, to see the truth that was growing like dawn in the dark. Chapter 5. The Healer's Warning. Love does not arrive as a blessing. It comes as a fever, a possession that unmakes you before it saves you. Night had barely lifted when Leora entered the East Tower. The air was heavy with damp incense, the kind used to drive sickness from stone. Candles burned low, trembling in their pools of wax. A copper bowl steamed beside her, salt, sage, and a sliver of silver ash swirling inside. She was preparing for truth. When Elara came, she came quietly, veiled as always. The hem of her gown brushed against the old rug, tracing paths through the dust. She had not spoken to anyone since dawn. But Leora could feel the storm that brewed behind that silence. "You sent for me," Elara said. Leora's fingers stilled over the bowl. Yes, sit. Elara hesitated, then obeyed. The faint crackle of the brazier was the only sound between them. Outside, the wind carried the cry of wolves from the southern cliffs, deep, mournful, endless. "You feel it, don't you?" Leora murmured without looking up. "The pull, the forest calling again." Elara's throat tightened. "You speak as if it were alive." "It is," Leora said. "Everything born of old blood is." She lifted the bowl and poured a thin stream of smoke into the air. The scent filled the room, bitter and sweet at once. Leora's eyes gleamed faintly gold in the dimness. "There's something binding you to him," she said. "The king. It isn't mere chance." Elara rose suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Enough." But Leora stood too, and her voice sharpened. Not cruel, but urgent. "You think I don't know that kind of bond? I was once bound too, to a man whose touch felt like mercy and fire, and it nearly killed us both." Elara froze. "What happened?" "The curse broke," Leora said softly, "but the love did not. The silence after that was a wound." Elara turned away, her hands trembling beneath the folds of her cloak. "You think I invited this? That I wanted to feel—" "No," Leora interrupted gently, "but wanting is not always choice. Sometimes it's inheritance." Meanwhile, in the council hall below, Kyle faced his wolves. 7 men and women, each bearing the mark of the pack on their wrist, stood in a half-circle. Among them, Thane, his beta and oldest friend, spoke first. "She doesn't belong here," Thane said, his voice low but hard. "Your forest sickens. Your men grow restless. And yet you bring a stranger into the heart of the keep." Kyle leaned against the edge of the table, the light from the tall windows slicing across his face. "She's no stranger to the curse. That makes her our only chance." "She's the reason for it," Thane replied. "Or part of it. You know what the old runes said. The marked one will return beneath a broken moon." Kyle's jaw tightened. "You would rather we wait and do nothing?" Thane's eyes flickered. "I would rather you remember what happened the last time you followed your heart before your reason." The words struck deeper than Thane intended. Kyle straightened slowly. "Be careful, old friend." Thane inclined his head but didn't back down. "I speak as one who's bled beside you, not as your enemy. The men whisper already. They call her the Veiled Curse. If you keep her here, they will turn on you." Kyle's voice dropped to a near growl. "Then let them—" The room fell silent. Only Eldrick, the grey-haired scholar among them, dared to speak after that. "Majesty, if she carries the mark, she may also carry the cure. The curse feeds on isolation. If you send her away, it will grow stronger." Kyle's gaze flicked toward the high windows, where the wind clawed at the glass. He remembered the way Elara had looked at him on the cliffs, not with fear, but with a kind of exhausted bravery, as if she had already been burned by every other world and this was the last place left to fall. "Then she stays," he said. "But no one touches her. No one speaks her name beyond these walls." That evening the keep felt different. Something in the air had shifted, thicker, closer, as though the stones themselves held their breath. Elara found herself wandering through the old chapel, guided by the dim light of the votive lamps. It was quiet there, eerily so. The murals were faded, saints half devoured by time. She trailed her hand over one, the image of a woman cloaked in stars, her face hidden by a veil of silver. "Who is she?" she asked softly. A voice came from behind her. "The goddess of forgotten vows." She turned. Kyle stood in the doorway, shadowed by candlelight. "They said she watches over those who loved in secret," he said, "and punishes those who betrayed it." Elara's pulse quickened. "And which are you?" His eyes met hers. Tired, haunted, alive. Both, for a moment, neither spoke. The world outside seemed far away, the sea, the soldiers, the curses and whispers. There was only the soft sound of her breath, the flicker of a flame between them, and the slow recognition of something they both feared to name. "You shouldn't be here," she said finally. "I could say the same of you," he murmured, stepping closer. "Your people already suspect me. Let them. I've been condemned before." She should have moved away, but his nearness, his scent of cedar and salt, his warmth against the cold, felt like something that had been promised long ago in another life. "Kyle," she whispered, his name trembling like a secret she shouldn't have remembered. He stopped only when he was close enough that their shadows touched across the floor. "You said storms find you," he said quietly. "Then let this one find me too." Ilara's breath caught. "And when it destroys you," his eyes darkened, "then I'll finally be free." A candle guttered out between them, and the room fell half into darkness. Leora's words echoed somewhere distant. "Love does not arrive as a blessing, it comes as a fever." And still, Ilara did not move away. Chapter 6. The Feast of Shadows. In every court there are smiles that glitter sharper than daggers. The night of the feast came draped in crimson and gold. Torches flared in the courtyards, banners unfurling from every tower. The halls of Dareth Keep, usually solemn and cold, now pulsed with warmth and colour. Music spilled from the great chamber, violins, lyres, and the low hum of drums that echoed against the stone like a heartbeat. But beneath the laughter and perfume and shimmering wine, the air carried tension, a sweetness laced with poison. Ilara stood in the corridor outside the banquet hall, her palms damp beneath her gloves. The veil remained, lighter tonight, silver-threaded and sheer enough to shimmer when she moved. Leora had chosen her gown, pale dusk blue silk, shaped close to the waist and trailing like water. "You don't have to go," Leora had told her. "I do," Ilara had answered. "The wolves must see I'm not a ghost." And so she came. From behind the half-open doors came the rise of voices, men laughing too loudly, women whispering too softly. She drew one long breath and entered, every head turned. The music faltered for a heartbeat as she crossed the threshold, the torches bent toward her, as though curious themselves. Even the air seemed to shift, an invisible ripple following the quiet sound of her steps. Whispers broke through the silence. "The Veiled One. Is that her? Why does the king let her?" Then Kyle rose. He stood at the head of the long table, a goblet in hand, his dark hair catching the glow of the chandelier above. The black of his tunic was edged with silver embroidery, the sigil of the wolf gleaming faintly at his shoulder. When he looked at her, the room fell utterly still. "Ilara of the forest," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber like something half-spoken, half-commanded. "Be welcome in my hall." Her heart stumbled once, then steadied. She bowed slightly. "Your Majesty honors me. Sit beside me," he said. There was no invitation in his tone, only certainty, as though the seat had always belonged to her. Thane's jaw tightened from across the table. Leora, seated 2 places down, watched in silence, her gaze sharp and unreadable. Ilara sat, her hands resting on her lap, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her. The torches crackled. The smell of spiced wine and roasted meat filled the air, but beneath it she could taste the metallic edge of unease. Kyle leaned slightly closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Let them look," he murmured. "The night is full of masks. Yours is only more honest." She almost smiled, but caught herself before she did. The feast began. Servants moved like shadows, pouring wine, bringing platters of venison and figs and honeyed bread. Musicians struck up a slower tune, mournful, elegant, haunting. Conversation bloomed and died in clusters, laughter echoing too bright in the candlelight. And then the doors opened again. A tall figure entered, cloaked in burgundy, his face half lit by flame. His voice carried, smooth as silk and dangerous as sleep. "My king, forgive my lateness." Kyle's expression froze. "Lord Reiner?" Elara looked at him sharply. The man's gaze swept the hall, settling on her with unhurried curiosity. He bowed low, but his smile did not reach his eyes. "I was not told we had such luminous company," Reiner said, his voice lingering over the word like a caress and a threat in one. Kyle's hand clenched around his goblet. "You were not told because you were not expected." "Ah," Reiner murmured, "and yet here I am." He took his seat opposite them, his gaze returning again and again to Elara. Something in her chest tightened. There was something familiar about him, the way his words coiled, the faint scent of smoke and bitter herbs that clung to him. And then she saw it, the ring on his hand. The same sigil her stepmother once wore. Her blood went cold. The feast wore on, though she barely heard the laughter anymore. Every sound blurred, every flicker of torchlight stretched into shadow. Reiner's gaze was a weight she could not shake. At last he raised his goblet. "To peace," he said, voice smooth as oil. "To new alliances, and old debts repaid." The wine in Kyle's glass shimmered faintly redder than before. Leora stiffened. Her fingers brushed the edge of her own cup, her eyes flicking toward Elara in silent warning. But before anyone could move, Elara reached across and caught Kyle's wrist. "Don't," she said softly. The hall fell into silence. Every eye turned. Kyle looked at her, confusion shadowed with something deeper. "Why?" She leaned close enough that her breath brushed his ear. "It's poisoned." A hush tore through the room. Reiner's smile faltered for the first time. Kyle rose slowly, his hand still caught in hers. The torches guttered, shadows stretching long and thin across the table. "Take him," he commanded. Steel hissed. Guards moved. But Reiner only laughed, a sound like a curse breaking free. "You think you've escaped your mother's reach, girl?" he hissed. "Her blood sings through you still." Then the lights went out. A gust of wind tore through the hall, scattering candles and goblets alike. Screams echoed, chairs crashed, and when the torches flared again, Reiner was gone. Only his ring lay on the table, still warm. Kyle turned to Elara, his expression raw, half fury, half fear. "What did he mean?" he demanded. "Your mother? What is she?" Elara's voice broke, quiet but cutting. "Not my mother," she said. "My curse." And then, before he could stop her, she tore the veil away. The hall gasped. Her face, half beauty, half burned ruin, gleamed in the torchlight. One eye glowed faintly with the silver mark of her stepmother's hex. Yet there was no shame in her gaze, only defiance. "This," she whispered, "is what your enemy made of me." Kyle did not recoil. Instead, he stepped forward, slow and unyielding, until his hand brushed her cheek, fingers trembling but steady. "You are not her curse," he said. "You are her undoing." And before the court, before the whispers, before the trembling of fate itself, he bent and kissed her, once fierce and unafraid. The hall erupted in chaos around them, but neither heard. For a moment, there was only the silence that follows truth, the stillness after the storm. Chapter 7. The Queen in the Mirror. Monsters are not born, they are remembered. The sea was restless that night. From the highest tower of Dareth Keep, the horizon looked alive, black water rolling beneath a bruised moon, the wind laced with salt and the faint taste of thunder. Elara could not sleep. She stood by the window, her veil gone, her reflection fractured by the old glass. The scars along her cheek caught the candlelight like threads of molten silver. For years she had hidden them, not for shame but to survive. But now the truth breathed freely on her skin, raw and trembling. Behind her, the chamber door opened without a sound. Kyle entered, barefoot and unarmored, his hair unbound, his eyes carrying the exhaustion of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. He had not spoken much since the feast, since she'd ripped the veil from her face and shattered the illusion that had kept them both safe. "Your guards will talk," she said softly, not turning. "Let them," Kyle replied. "They talk when I breathe." His voice was rough, not with anger but with the weight of too many choices. He crossed the floor until he stood beside her. The wind lifted the edge of the curtain, carrying the scent of rain and cold stone between them. "I should have told you," she whispered. "About her, about what she did." He looked at her then, the lamplight painting his features in gold and shadow. "Tell me now." She turned away, her hands trembling against the sill. "My stepmother was once queen of the Eastern Vale, a witch with blood older than the sea itself. When my father died, she bound his spirit to her own, so she would never lose her throne, but she could not control what she became. Her magic began to devour her, and everything she loved." Her voice cracked, quiet but sharp as glass. "She blamed me, said I was the reason her magic turned to poison, said I carried the wrong kind of light, so she cursed me. To bear her face in ruin, to hide what she could not destroy." Kyle's jaw tightened. "And the man at the feast, Reiner, her envoy," Elara said. "He feeds on what she dreams. If he's here, it means she's awake again." Kyle said nothing for a long while. His silence was heavy, but it did not feel cruel. It felt like listening, the kind that digs into the bone. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady. "She cannot have you." Elara's laugh was faint, hollow. "She already does. I can feel her inside my skin when I sleep." Kyle's eyes darkened. "Then we'll burn her out." The wind howled through the window, shaking the shutters. Elara turned toward him, the stormlight painting her bare scars in silver blue. He reached up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her temple, a touch that was careful, reverent, afraid of its own strength. "You shouldn't," she said, her breath trembling. "Touching me ties you to her." "Then let her see," he whispered. "Let her see that what she cursed still breathes." Their eyes met, and in that silence something shifted. It was not the blinding, perfect kind of love sung by poets. It was the raw kind, born from hunger, from defiance, from the ache of two souls who had forgotten what mercy felt like. When he kissed her, it was slow, hesitant, as though he was learning the shape of her pain. And she let him because for the first time in years her body remembered warmth without fear. The candle went out. The storm outside rose. Far across the sea, in a palace of bone and smoke, a mirror shattered. The queen awoke. Her eyes, black as the bottom of the ocean, opened beneath a crown of rusted gold. She rose from her throne, her bare feet leaving trails of frost across the floor. "Who dares warm what I have frozen?" she whispered. In the reflection of the broken glass she saw them, a man and a woman, their lips touching, their fates entwined. Her laughter slithered through the halls like a serpent. "So," she murmured, "my little flame still burns." She turned to the shadow waiting by the doorway. "Bring me the boy." The figure stepped forward, tall, cloaked in midnight. A faint scar crossed his throat, and his eyes gleamed with a strange familiar gold. "Yes, my queen, kill the king," she said, "and bring her home." At Dareth Keep, Elara woke to the sound of wolves howling. The moon had turned red. Kyle stirred beside her, his body warm against the cold sheets. But the howls outside were not their usual chorus. They were warning cries. Something ancient was moving through the forest, closer, closer. "Ilara," Kyle said, rising, his eyes shifting. Half man, half wolf. "Stay here." But she was already standing, clutching her cloak around her shoulders, her pulse a drumbeat of dread. "No," she whispered. "She's found us." Chapter 8. The Assassin's Oath. The past does not die when buried. It waits, sharpening its teeth in the dark. The forest was not silent that night. It moved, whispering, breathing, watching. Beneath the blood-colored moon, mist wound through the trees like silk torn from the veil of a ghost. Somewhere beyond the hills, a single rider crossed into Dareth's lands, his horse black as ash, his cloak drenched in sea rain. He carried no banner, no name, only a dagger of obsidian bound with a blood-marked seal. Inside the keep, Ilara felt it before the guards did, a shift in the air, subtle, ancient, the kind that didn't belong to the living. She stood at the high window of her chamber, fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the moon tremble over the sea. Kyle had not returned since dawn. He'd ridden out with his wolves to scout the outer woods, leaving her with Leora and a growing unease that sat in her bones like sickness. The door opened softly behind her. Leora entered, her hands smeared with herbs, her eyes sharp. "You feel it too," the healer said. It wasn't a question. Ilara nodded. "Something is coming." "Something?" Leora murmured. "Or someone?" Down in the courtyard, the guards raised torches as the stranger dismounted. He moved like a shadow-given form, his stride silent even on gravel. The guards crossed their spears before him. "Halt! State your allegiance!" The man lifted his head. The torchlight caught his face, half in darkness, half in something cruelly beautiful. A scar cut from his jaw to his throat, thin as a thread of silver. "I come by royal order," he said, voice low, deliberate. "I seek the Alpha-King." One of the guards frowned. "Name yourself, Lucien." He spoke it like a memory. And when he smiled, it was the kind that promised both comfort and ruin. By the time Kyle returned, rain followed him, hard, relentless. His wolves fanned behind him, eyes glowing faintly through the mist. He dismounted, stripping off his gloves as he entered the hall. "Report," he ordered. Thane stepped forward, tension etched into every line of his face. A rider entered the gate at dusk. "Says he bears word from the eastern shores. He carries your crest, but his seals—" "Old. Older than you. Where is he?" "In the lower chamber. Waiting." Kyle paused, jaw tight. He could feel it too, the wrongness, the scent of magic disguised in human skin. "Bring Ilara," he said. "Now." When Ilara entered the chamber, the stranger was already there, kneeling before the hearth, his cloak drying beside him. He looked up as she stepped inside, and the world seemed to tilt. Her breath left her. "Lucien." It was barely a whisper. The man rose, eyes like dying embers fixed on her face. For a moment, something unguarded flickered through them. Shock, ache, recognition. Then he bowed low, concealing it beneath formality. "My lady," he said, his voice smooth but trembling at the edges. "It has been long." Kyle's gaze snapped between them. "You know him?" Ilara's throat felt tight. "He was once my protector, my friend, before the curse." Lucien smiled faintly. "Before everything burned." His words hung like smoke. That night stretched endlessly. The three of them, Kyle, Ilara, Lucien, sat before the fire while the storm raged outside. The flames threw restless shadows across the walls, bending light over scars and secrets alike. Kyle questioned him carefully, watching every shift of his eyes. "You claim to serve the Eastern Court." "I served it once," Lucien said. "Now I serve only what remains of it." "And what remains?" Lucian's gaze flicked toward Alara. "You—" Alara stiffened. "What do you mean?" "The Queen has risen," he said. "She commands the old ways again. Her mirror calls for you, Alara. She says her blood will not be denied." Kyle's hand curled into a fist. "If she sends her hounds, we'll cut them down." Lucian's expression didn't change, but his voice softened, almost sorrowful. "Her hound already stands before you, Majesty." Silence fell, and then he drew the dagger. The firelight caught the edge, black glass, glistening with runes, but his hand trembled. He moved like lightning, but not toward Kyle. The blade turned, pressing against his own throat. "I was sent to kill you both," Lucian said, voice raw. "But she did not know. She cursed me too, bound my soul to hers as she did yours, Alara. I cannot kill you without dying myself." Kyle stepped forward, his voice a growl. "Then break the bond." Lucian's eyes burned. "I've tried. Every night for 7 years." He looked at Alara then, truly looked, and something inside her cracked open. The boy she remembered, the one who had once stolen her laughter beneath orchard trees, was still there, buried beneath shadow. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "In every way that matters I am," he said. The dagger fell to the floor. Kyle's hand shot out, seizing Lucian's collar. "Why come here? Why risk everything?" Lucian met his gaze with quiet defiance. "Because I needed to see her once more before the Queen calls me back." "You think I'll let her have you?" Kyle hissed. "You don't understand," Lucian said. "She owns me." And as he spoke, the mark on his neck flared, black light blooming beneath his skin, like ink spreading through veins. He gasped, staggering back. Alara lunged forward, catching him before he fell. "Lucian!" His hand caught hers, tight, desperate. "Don't come after me. The moment she knows I've found you, she'll come herself." Then the wind shattered the window. A burst of light tore through the chamber, and Lucian was gone, swallowed by the Queen's call. All that remained was the faint scent of salt and burning roses. Kyle stood in the ruin of silence, his chest heaving, his knuckles bloodied against the wall. Alara still knelt on the floor, staring at the empty space where her past had vanished again. "He'll come back," she whispered. Kyle's voice was hoarse. "Then we'll be ready." "No," she said softly, turning her scarred face toward him, tears catching the light like glass. "You don't understand. He won't come back to find me. He'll come back to kill me." Chapter 9. The Wolves and the Sea. The sea does not forgive. It remembers every whisper, every wound. The rain did not end for 3 nights. It poured like morning over the cliffs of Dareth, over the broken towers and the trembling woods. The world itself seemed to grieve something unnamed. Kyle had not slept. He stood alone upon the battlement, cloak clinging to him in the wind. The sea roared far below, black and alive, as if something ancient stirred beneath it, something older than kings or curses. His hand gripped the stone wall until his knuckles bled. Behind him, the keep breathed with restless life, wolves pacing, messengers running through the corridors, candles flickering over maps inked with blood and prophecy. Yet in Kyle's heart, there was only one voice, hers, Alara. She had spoken Lucian's name like a wound reopening. In her chamber, Alara sat by the window where the sea met the fog. She was writing again, her quill trembling, her words more confession than ink. Each sentence bled into the next, her thoughts unraveling with every heartbeat. He lives, and yet he is no longer mine to grieve. Kyle burns for me, though he does not say it, and I, cursed as I am, burn for them both. The parchment tore slightly under her trembling hand. Leora entered quietly, bringing a tray of wild tea steeped in wolf mint. Her eyes caught the broken lines of the letter and the unspoken anguish in Alara's face. "You cannot save what was lost," Leora said softly, But you can still save what stands before you. Elara looked up. And what if both are doomed? Then choose the one you're willing to burn with. By the fourth day, the first ravens arrived. Each bore the same seal, wax black, stamped with the sigil of the Eastern Queen. Kyle broke the first one himself. The sea has taken her voice, and I will take her heart. Return her to me, or I will raise the tide until Dareth drowns. The message was not signed. It did not need to be. The scent of salt and roses clung to the parchment. Kyle crushed it in his fist. She's toying with us. Thane, standing beside him, shifted uneasily. If Lucien still lives, he does, Kyle said flatly, and she's using him to watch us. At dusk, Kyle found Elara in the gardens. The rain had eased into a mist, delicate as breath. She stood beneath the hanging lanterns, her hair unbound, her cloak slipping from her shoulders. The roses were in bloom again, though the season was wrong. Too early, too red. You shouldn't be out here, Kyle said quietly. She didn't turn. I couldn't breathe inside. He came closer, stopping beside her. The scent of wet earth and salt lingered between them. Her fingers brushed a rose petal, and crimson dew clung to her skin like blood. You've been watching the sea again, he murmured. I can feel him out there, she said, like he's caught between waves, calling, but I can't reach him. Kyle's hand lifted before he could stop himself, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. You don't owe him your soul anymore, Elara. Her eyes rose to his, wide, storm-lit. And what if he still holds it? Kyle's breath caught. Then let him drown with it, he said, voice low, rough. You deserve to live, to be wanted, not worshipped, not cursed. She turned to face him fully now, their faces inches apart. The lantern light trembled against their skin. Wanted, she whispered. He nodded once, the word falling from his mouth like confession. Yes. The silence that followed was not empty. It pulsed, it breathed. Her fingers grazed his wrist, hesitant, trembling, as if testing the boundaries of the world itself. Kyle's heart thundered. He could feel the warmth of her pulse, fragile yet defiant, beneath his thumb. Kyle. His name left her lips like prayer. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. Rain traced soft paths down their faces. If I kiss you, he whispered, there will be no undoing it. Then don't stop. And he didn't. The kiss was slow, unguarded, devastating, like two souls that had waited lifetimes and still weren't ready. The world blurred around them, the rain, the roses, the flicker of torches. Everything folded into that one trembling heartbeat when love stopped pretending to be anything else. But the sea did not sleep. Far beyond the cliffs, lightning split the clouds and the water rose in defiance. A fleet of black ships breached the horizon, sails emblazoned with the sigil of the Queen. At their helm stood Lucien, his eyes dim but burning, a chain of shadow coiled around his throat. The curse pulsed through him like poison, and from the waves below, the Queen's voice whispered through the foam. Bring me the heart that defied me. That night, Elara woke to the sound of the sea screaming. Chapter 10, The Salt and the Blood. When the sea comes for you, it brings everything you've buried. The storm broke just before dawn. The horizon was a bruise of grey and fire. From the watchtower, Kyle saw them first, black sails rising like funeral wings across the morning tide. The Queen's ships moved in silence, their hulls carved with runes that pulsed faintly with blue flame. The air itself seemed to tighten, thick with the smell of salt and death. Sound the horns, Kyle said. His voice was steady, but his hand trembled once before he clenched it. Wake the wolves. By mid-morning, Dareth Keep was alive with motion. Torches blazed against the rain, echoing along stone halls that smelled of iron and pine. The courtyard filled with armored men and shifting forms, wolves half-shifted, their eyes glowing with the reflection of the storm. Thane stood beside Kyle, his scarred hand gripping the hilt of his blade. "She's coming herself," he said, eyes narrowed. "No army of hers would cross the tide otherwise." Kyle's jaw set. "Then we end it here." In her chamber, Elara stood before the mirror. Her reflection wavered like candlelight, sometimes her face, sometimes her stepmother's. The veil of the curse had begun to fray, and with it came whispers, fragments of other voices, other lives. The Queen's presence was no longer distant, it was inside her. "You cannot fight her," the voice murmured through the glass. "You are what she made you." Elara pressed her palm against the mirror until it cracked beneath her touch. "Then I'll unmake myself before I become you." Blood ran down her hand in a thin line, bright as ruby. Behind her, the door opened. Kyle stood in the threshold, soaked from rain, eyes storm-dark. "They've come ashore," he said. "I won't ask you to stay behind, but if you come with me, you do so as my equal." She turned, her face pale but steady. "I will not hide while others bleed for me." He nodded once. "Then stand with me." When she took his hand, it was cold, but her grip was unflinching. The first clash came at noon. The sea boiled with black fire as the Queen's soldiers, half-human, half-shadow, stormed the beach. Wolves tore through the ranks with snarling grace, their fur slick with rain and blood. The sound of steel rang through the air like thunder breaking. Kyle fought at the front, a whirlwind of fury and precision. Every strike of his blade was guided not by anger, but by love's desperate, savage will to protect. And through it all, Elara's presence burned at his back. Her power no longer hidden, her curse now a weapon. Each movement of her hands called the storm, her voice weaving words in a forgotten tongue that made the air hum and the enemy falter. Rain turned crimson. The tide climbed higher. Then, through the smoke and rain, he appeared, Lucian. He moved like a ghost through the battlefield, his cloak torn, his eyes hollow and fever-bright. Chains of black sigils wound around his throat, their glow pulsing with each heartbeat. The Queen's curse bound him, but not completely. When Elara saw him, her breath caught. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. "Lucian," she whispered. He froze. Her voice, even now, reached through the fog in his mind. The sound of a life he had buried, of a love he had destroyed and yet could never forget. "Elara!" His voice was raw. "Run!" The chain around his throat tightened, jerking him backward. The Queen's voice rose through the storm, a hiss that seemed to come from the sea itself. "Kill her!" Lucian's scream tore through the air. He fell to his knees, clawing at his neck as the curse flared white-hot. And then his eyes changed. The man she had once known was swallowed by the shadow that owned him. Kyle reached her first, pulling her behind him as Lucian rose again, his blade drawn. "He's not himself," Elara cried. "She's inside him." Kyle didn't move his weapon. His gaze locked on Lucian's, and what passed between them was not hatred, it was recognition. Two men, both bound by love for the same woman, both cursed by it. "She'll kill him through you," Elara said, her voice breaking. Kyle hesitated for only a moment, then dropped his sword. "Lucian," he said evenly, "if you want me, take me, but she's not yours to destroy." Lucian's breath came in ragged bursts. "I can't. Stop!" The chains coiled tighter, their glow searing. Elara stepped forward, the wind tearing at her hair and cloak. "Then I'll stop it." She pressed her hands against his chest, right where the sigils burned brightest. Her power met the curse like flame to oil. For a moment, the world split open. The sea roared, the sky bled light, and then everything fell silent. The chains shattered. Lucian collapsed against her, gasping. Elara knelt beside him, tears mixing with the rain. "It's done," she whispered. "You're free." He looked up at her, eyes soft with something ancient and sorrowful. Free, but not saved. And then he smiled, a small, broken smile, and she saw it before he spoke, the blade buried in his side. Kyle reached them too late. Lucian's blood mingled with the rain, black and silver. His voice trembled. "Tell her, I didn't mean to love her wrong." Elara clutched him, sobbing silently as his eyes closed, his body going still against her chest. The sea pulled back. The ships began to burn, and from far across the waves the Queen screamed. That night, the storm ended. The beach was littered with the remnants of battle, armor, ash, petals torn from the cursed roses that had once adorned the Queen's court. Kyle found Elara still sitting where Lucian had fallen, the sea whispering around her knees. "He saved us," she murmured. After everything, Kyle knelt beside her, his hand brushing the wet strand of hair from her face. "He saved you." She turned toward him, her eyes hollow but clear. "And what will save you, Kyle?" He did not answer. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her, and she let herself fold into his warmth, into the silence between their grief and what might still come. Above them, the moon broke through the clouds, white as bone, watching. Chapter 11. The Queen's Heart. Some curses are not broken, they are understood. The tide had gone out. The sea lay still as glass, holding the reflection of a world half ruined and half reborn. Dawn bled faintly across the water, and Dareth Keep, though battered, still stood. But Kyle and Elara did not stay to see it heal. By the time the first sunlight touched the tower walls, they were already aboard a small ship, its sails ghost pale against the horizon. The sea would take them east, to the place where the Queen had bound her soul to the undercurrent of the world, to the heart of her curse. The voyage was quiet, haunted by memory. Kyle spent his nights awake, sitting by the stern, sharpening his blade, though he no longer trusted steel to save them. Elara watched him from the shadowed cabin doorway, the candle flickering behind her. He was different now, stripped of the rage that once defined him, wearing something softer and more terrible in its place. Grief had not made him weaker. It had made him real. One night, when the sea was calm and the moon rode low, she came to him. The wind carried her hair against his cheek. Neither spoke for a while. "He loved you," Kyle said finally, voice rough. Elara nodded, eyes on the dark water. "And I failed him." Kyle turned, catching her chin gently between his fingers. "You freed him." Her breath hitched. "And what if I can't free you?" He smiled faintly, a curve of sorrow and tenderness. "Then let me burn with you." The words should have frightened her. Instead they steadied her, like hearing her own secret aloud. By the third day the fog thickened. The sea darkened to ink. Shapes moved beneath it, massive and slow, as if something ancient was breathing below the surface. The air shimmered faintly with magic. "This is it," Elara whispered. "The drowned kingdom." Kyle looked out across the mist. "Your mother's grave." "Her throne," Elara corrected softly. Then, from the fog it appeared, a tower of glass and coral, rising from the sea like a broken cathedral. Waves crashed against its base, and the scent of lilies, cold, funereal, filled the air. They stepped ashore. The water lapped at their ankles, strangely warm. Every sound echoed, their footsteps, their breaths, as if the place itself was listening. The doors of the tower opened without a touch. Inside, the air shimmered with memories. Paintings hung from the walls, each depicting a version of Alara, as a child laughing, as a bride in white, as a queen crowned in flame. The images moved faintly, the eyes following them. "She's been waiting," Alara murmured. Her voice trembled but did not falter. At the end of the long hall stood a mirror, the same that had haunted her dreams. Within it, a reflection stood waiting. The Queen. Her stepmother appeared unchanged, beautiful and terrible. Her gown rippled like oil, and her smile was made of shadow and honey. "My darling," the Queen purred, "you've come home." Alara's pulse pounded in her throat. "You have no home left to rule." The Queen's eyes softened with something like pity. "You still don't understand, do you? You were never cursed by me. You were me." Kyle stepped forward, blade drawn. "Lies." But the Queen ignored him. Her gaze locked on Alara's face, the scars, the glow beneath her skin. "The mirror didn't take your beauty," she said. "It revealed it. Every mark, every wound. You carry my power in your flesh. You've spent your whole life running from what you are." Alara's hands shook. "I am not you." The Queen smiled faintly. "Then prove it." The mirror began to hum. Its surface rippled like water, and from it emerged a reflection of Alara herself, identical, except for the eyes. They were black and endless, like the sea. The reflection lunged. Kyle moved instantly, but the Queen's magic threw him backwards, slamming him into the marble wall. Blood trickled down his temple. He struggled to rise, but invisible chains bound him to the floor. "Kyle!" Alara cried. The reflection circled her, movements liquid and eerily graceful. "All your life you've hidden," it whispered, "behind veils, behind pain, behind love you thought would save you. But you and I, we are the same." Alara closed her eyes. "No." The reflection's voice darkened. "You cannot destroy what you refuse to claim." When Alara opened her eyes, they glowed faintly, silver, not gold. She lifted her hands, and for the first time, she didn't fight the curse. She called it. The air cracked. The reflection froze mid-step, its body shuddering as light poured from Alara's palms, threads of fire weaving through shadow. "You're right," Alara whispered. "We are the same. But only one of us is free." The reflection screamed, and a sound like glass shattering, and dissolved into 1,000 shards of light. The Queen's cry echoed through the hall, raw and feral. The mirrors lining the walls burst one by one until only silence remained. Alara sank to her knees, trembling. Smoke and light curled around her. The Queen staggered forward, her beauty crumbling, her face fracturing into age and shadow. "Foolish girl," she hissed. "You've broken the mirror, not the curse." Alara looked up, her voice steadied despite the tears. "I've broken you." The Queen smiled one last time, a terrible, empty smile, and then turned to glass. Kyle broke free, reaching her side as the tower began to tremble. The sea roared outside, rising higher. The structure was collapsing, the magic that held it unraveling. He pulled her to her feet, his hand clasping hers tight. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I can," she said faintly. "If you stay beside me, always." They ran together through the collapsing hall, past falling mirrors and spirals of dying light. The sea crashed through the doors, devouring everything behind them, and as they reached the shore, the tower fell into itself with a sound like a sigh. They stood in the shallows, breathless. The sea was calm again. Kyle turned to her, brushing the wet hair from her face. "It's over." Alara looked at the horizon, where dawn touched the water. "Not yet," she said quietly. "Curses don't die, they change, and so must we." Chapter 12, The Morning After the Curse. All that survives the storm is truth. The sea slept again. Its surface glimmered with the pale light of dawn, soft as silk stretched to infinity. The drowned tower was gone, swallowed by water and memory, leaving only ripples that whispered of what had been. Kyle and Elara stood on the shore, barefoot and silent. The wind tugged at their cloaks, the salt clinging to their skin. Behind them, the ship lay half broken against the rocks, its sails torn but still breathing with the ghost of wind. For a long time, neither spoke. Elara's hand trailed over the water's edge, the foam catching her fingers. The scars along her cheek no longer burned. They shimmered faintly, like the last traces of moonlight before morning. Kyle watched her in silence. He wanted to say we survived, but the words felt too small. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. "It's strange," she said quietly. "All my life I thought freedom meant being untouched, unmarked, but the curse, her curse, it was the only thing that ever proved I was real." Kyle stepped closer, his boots sinking into the wet sand. "You're not her legacy," he said. "You're your own beginning." Her lips curved faintly. "And you, what are you now, Kyle of Dareth?" He smiled, weary but true. A man learning how to live when there's no one left to fight. They returned to Dareth 3 days later. The keep rose on the cliffs, wounded but standing. The people who remained greeted them with torches and quiet tears. Liora ran to Elara first, clutching her hands as if afraid she might vanish again. The wolves howled from the high slopes, a mournful, reverent song that carried across the fields. In the great hall, Kyle placed his sword upon the table and left it there. The sound of the blade against stone echoed like an ending. "I am done being king," he said softly. The council stared, stunned, but Elara's gaze held no surprise, only understanding. "You were never meant to rule from fear," she said, "only from love." As weeks passed, the land began to heal. The rain ceased. The roses returned, blooming wild across the courtyard walls. The scent of pine and salt mingled in the morning air. At dusk, the wolves still sang, but their song was no longer one of mourning. It was a hymn of homecoming. Elara often walked the cliffs alone, barefoot, her hair unbound. She carried no veil now. When the villagers saw her, they bowed, not to her beauty, but to her truth. Children whispered that she could still speak to the sea. That sometimes, if you stood near her long enough, you could hear another voice in the waves, a man's laughter, fading but warm, Lucian's. She never denied it. Some loves, after all, do not die. They become the tide itself. One evening, Kyle found her there, on the cliffs where it had all begun. The sun was setting, gold spilling across the water. Her dress whipped around her in the wind, a shadow of silver against the light. "Still listening to ghosts?" he asked. She smiled without turning. "They're quieter now." He stepped behind her, his arms sliding around her waist. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. The sea below glowed like molten glass. "Do you ever wonder," she said, "if we were meant to find each other, or if we simply refused not to?" He chuckled softly. "Both, I think. Destiny's never as clever as it believes." She laughed then, a sound that had been absent for so long it startled him. When he turned her to face him, her eyes were bright with that laughter, and for the first time there was no shadow behind it. He kissed her there, beneath the fading sun. It wasn't a kiss of desperation or curse-breaking. It was quiet, steady, real. The kind of love that no longer needed to survive the storm, because it had learned how to live in the calm. As night fell, the stars came out one by one, scattering across the sky like spilled ink. Elara whispered against his lips, "It's over." Kyle shook his head gently. "No," he said. "It's just beginning." The tide rolled in, touching their feet before slipping back again, as if the sea itself bowed in farewell. In the darkness that followed, the Queen's voice was gone. The curse was not lifted. it had been transformed. Because in the end, it was never about breaking magic. It was about becoming whole through it. And as the waves whispered against the shore, carrying the scent of roses and salt, the world, at last, was quiet enough to listen. Many years later, travellers still tell of a woman who walks the cliffs of Dareth at dawn, her eyes silver, her laughter like wind. They say she is the sea's beloved, and the wolves keep her name. And when the tide comes in red beneath the moon, some swear they see two shadows standing side by side, one crowned in flame, one crowned in peace, watching the world they saved.